There it was, Karen's shiny luxury SUV, slowly disappearing nose first into the muddy pond on my farm. The wheels spun helplessly in the muck, bubbles rising like a cauldron. While she stood on the bank shrieking, I sat in my excavator, sipping my morning coffee, watching the scene unfold like a live-action comedy. Now, I know what you're thinking. Why in the world would a middle-aged farmer sink an SUV with heavy machinery? Believe me, I never imagined I'd be the guy making an HOA president scream like she was on a sinking ship. But when someone rolls onto your land, treats it like their personal parking lot, and then throws a wine and yoga picnic on your hayfield, patience only lasts so long. So buckle up, because this isn't just a story about a car in the mud. It's about neighbors who underestimated a farmer, and how one entitled Karen learned that when you play HOA games on private land, you get farm-style consequences. Before we dive in, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. You won't want to miss how this story ends. If you'd asked me a few years ago what I thought about HOAs, I'd have said I never dealt with one and planned to keep it that way. I was born and raised on this farm. My dad worked this land before me, and his dad before him. We grow hay, raise cattle, keep chickens, and in general mind our own business. It's not glamorous, but it's steady. The kind of life where you wake up with the sunrise, hear the roosters crow, and know exactly where your food comes from. Out here, the only rules were the ones nature made. Plant in season, fix your fences, keep the well clean. There was no committee dictating what shade of beige your barn should be, or how many inches your grass was allowed to grow. That was the beauty of it, freedom. For decades, that's how it stayed. But then the subdivision came. Developers bought up a big patch of land a mile from my property line. Within a year, what had been a cornfield turned into a cul-de-sac. They called it Meadowbrook Estates, which was funny because there wasn't a single meadow left after they bulldozed everything flat. Brochures described it as a gated lifestyle. Community, as if sticking a guard. Shack at the entrance magically made it safer or classier. And with the subdivision came the HOA. You know the type, self-important. Suburban warriors armed with clipboards, bylaws, and the belief they're the last defense between order and chaos. At first I didn't care. Live and let live, right? They could manicure their lawns into perfect little green carpets and obsess over mailbox heights all they wanted. As long as they stayed on their side, I'd stay on mine. But then came Karen. Her name was Karen Thompson, and she proudly introduced herself as the lifestyle chairwoman of Meadowbrook Estates. That title was basically the HOA version of a medieval queen. She strutted around in yoga pants that probably cost more than my tractor tires, barking orders like she owned the whole county. The first time I met her, she wrinkled her nose at my honey jars at the farmer's market and told me my presentation could be elevated. The second time, she taped an HOA notice to my barn, demanding I repaint it to fit her community's vision. And the third time, she parked her SUV on my farm road, claiming it was rural access land her HOA had a right to use. That was the moment I realized Karen didn't see my farm as private property. She saw it as an extension of her subdivision, and she was determined to civilize it, whether I liked it or not. At first, I ignored the flyers, the insults, even the clipboard warriors who wandered onto my pasture, taking photos of my cows. But patience only works when the other side has boundaries. And if Karen had one thing, it was a complete lack of them. Each week, she escalated. First came the violation notices taped to my barn. Then came the beautification crew hammering signs into my fence line. Then came her wine and yoga event staged on my hayfield without permission. And then her shiny black SUV appeared on my farm road, parked like it belonged there. Not just once, but day after day. And when I told her to move it, she smirked and told me to file a complaint with the HOA. That's when I knew it wasn't just nagging anymore. This was war, and I had just the idea for how to fight back. Karen's SUV on my farm road wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a declaration. A glossy, chrome-plated flag planted squarely in the middle of my hay access. She left it there for 3 days, blocking my tractor, tearing up the dirt and daring me to do something about it. Now I know what you're thinking. Why didn't you just tow it? But here's the truth. Karen wasn't just being careless, she was making a statement. If I touched that car, she'd scream harassment, call the cops, and spin it into an HOA crusade. This wasn't about parking. It was about power. And that's the thing with people like Karen. They don't stop at testing limits. They push until something breaks. Before I tell you how I pushed back, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. You won't want to miss how this battle unfolds. The SUV was only the beginning. Soon, whispers started floating around town. HOA folks were talking about expanding recreational opportunities and integrating rustic charm into the Meadowbrook lifestyle. At first, I thought it was just another committee project, like decorative mailboxes or community birdhouses. But no, they were talking about my farm. By Saturday morning, the whispers turned into a full-on invasion. I stepped out of my house, coffee in hand, and nearly dropped the mug. Right there by my pond stood a massive white tent, complete with tables, pastel cloths, and pictures of mimosas. And at the center of it all, Karen wearing a sun hat and sipping Chardonnay at 10 a.m. She had transformed my farm into an HOA brunch venue overnight. Yoga mats covered my hayfield. My ducks terrorized her Pilates circle. My cows lined the fence, mooing like they'd been invited to a circus. The whole scene looked less like rustic charm and more like a carnival in chaos. I wanted to laugh, but underneath the humor was a sharp truth. This wasn't ignorance, it was entitlement. Karen wasn't asking for permission. She was claiming my land piece by piece until Meadowbrook Estates swallowed it whole. And she didn't stop with brunch. A week later, an entire convoy rolled up. 3 SUVs, a golf cart with security stenciled on the side, and half a dozen clipboard warriors marching like they were storming Normandy. Karen was at the front, armed with a bright orange blazer, oversized sunglasses, and a megaphone she must have bought just for the occasion. Through that megaphone, she declared my farm disruptive to community harmony. She slapped orange violation notices on my barn, on my fences, even on a cow's feed trough. According to her, my livestock were nuisances. My equipment was improperly stored, and my pond was an unregulated safety hazard. I tore the notices down as fast as they went up, but Karen only smirked, claiming she had filed a petition with the county to rezone my farm into community expansion land. Her followers cheered like she was leading a revolution. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just nagging anymore. This was a land grab, disguised under HOA jargon and wine-soaked brunches. And if Karen thought she could bulldoze over generations of blood, sweat and dirt with a stack of flyers and a Sharpie map, she was about to learn a very muddy lesson. Because one thing Karen didn't know, my pond wasn't just a pond. It was a trap waiting to be sprung. Karen's arrogance wasn't just a nuisance anymore. It was becoming a ritual. Every day, her shiny black SUV rolled onto my land like clockwork, gleaming in the sun, as if it was some sort of royal carriage. She didn't just park there. She displayed it, like she was planting Meadowbrook's flag on territory she thought was already conquered. And that's when she made her biggest mistake yet. She parked right by my pond. Now I know what you're thinking. Who in their right mind would park a luxury SUV worth more than most people's houses on the soft edge of a farm pond? The answer is simple. Someone who thought they were untouchable. Karen truly believed HOA rules weighed more than common sense. To her, my land wasn't private property. It was just another HOA amenity waiting to be beautified. But here's the thing. While Karen was plotting her expansion, I was plotting too. Not with flyers, not with clipboards, but with something a whole lot older and more reliable, the land itself. Before I show you how it all went down, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe. Because trust me, this is the part of the story that people around here are still talking about. You see, that pond isn't just a pond. Decades ago, my grandfather dug it as a reservoir, a safety net for dry summers. Over the years, its banks became unpredictable. From a distance, they look solid, grassy, even inviting. But step too close and the ground will swallow your boots whole. I've seen calves get stuck up to their knees in that muck. I've had to wade in, haul them out, and curse the silt for clinging to everything it touched. I knew every inch of that pond. Karen didn't. That difference, knowledge versus arrogance, was about to settle this feud once and for all. One evening, after her SUV sat glittering in the sunset like a trophy she hadn't earned, I rolled my old excavator out of the shed. Its diesel engine rumbled low steady, like a warhorse stretching its legs after a long nap. I drove it slow down to the edge of the pond and went to work. Scoop by scoop, I loosened the earth where I knew she liked to park. Not enough to make it obvious. No, just enough to make it treacherous. The trick was subtlety. The surface needed to look smooth and firm, like it could handle the weight of a vehicle. But underneath it was a trap waiting to spring. By dawn it was perfect. You'd never know just by looking. But I knew. And soon so would she. The next morning Karen strutted onto my property with the same smugness she always carried. Oversized sunglasses, floppy hat, a clipboard tucked under her arm like it was a crown scepter. She waved at me as though we were friendly neighbors, not combatants in a low-key war. Her entourage followed close behind, HOA board members trailing her like loyal ducklings. She walked straight to the SUV, parked at what she called the scenic overlook, and announced to anyone who would listen that Meadowbrook Estates would soon have the best event venue in the county. Weddings by the pond, yoga at sunrise, outdoor concerts, the whole sales pitch. Meanwhile, I just leaned against my tractor, sipping coffee, biting back a laugh. She was bragging on the very spot that was about to swallow her pride whole. Then came the moment. Karen climbed into the SUV, turned the key, and decided to inch it even closer to the water. For the view, she said proudly. The tires crunched forward. The crowd oohed and ahed, like she was unveiling a masterpiece. But then the ground sagged. At first it was subtle. The back wheels sank an inch, maybe two. Mud squelched softly. The SUV shuddered. I caught it immediately, but Karen didn't. She revved the engine, trying to push forward. Instead, the wheels spun, spraying muck in every direction. The more she pressed, the deeper the tires dug. Her entourage gasped. One clipboard warrior muttered something about unsafe terrain. Another fumbled for their phone, recording the scene. The smell of burning rubber mixed with the sour tang of wet earth. And me? I kept my cool. I fired up the excavator and rumbled closer, lowering the bucket until it hovered just behind the rear bumper. Karen glanced up, furious. She screamed something about harassment, about calling lawyers, about me endangering community property. But I wasn't threatening her. I was helping, at least that's how it looked. With one gentle nudge of the bucket, I shifted the soil just enough to send her SUV sliding forward another foot. The front end tilted downward, headlights glaring at the murky water like a pair of wide, frightened eyes. That's when the panic started. Karen jumped out, shouting into her phone, demanding tow trucks and emergency crews. The HOA board scattered, half recording the drama, half pretending not to know her. One woman in yoga pants shrieked as mud splattered her designer sneakers. But the SUV didn't care about lawsuits or sneakers. It only cared about gravity. With a groan of metal and a wet, sucking noise, the nose of the SUV slipped further down. Water lapped over the bumper. The back wheels spun uselessly, spraying brown arcs into the air. The once pristine vehicle was no longer a trophy. It was prey. The crowd's gasps turned into laughter. Farmers from down the road had shown up by then, leaning on fence posts, grinning wide. A couple of teenagers on dirt bikes circled at a distance, filming every second. And me. I stayed in the excavator, calm as ever, watching Karen's pride sink deeper with each passing second. Her screams of, "This is terrorism and you'll pay for this," didn't matter. The land doesn't care about bylaws or titles. The land always wins. By the time water reached the headlights, Karen's voice was hoarse. Her entourage was scattered. Her SUV was stuck, half submerged, looking less like a luxury car and more like a monument to arrogance. And I knew, as satisfying as this was, the real show hadn't even started. Because when the authorities arrived, when the video went online, and when the HOA realized they'd backed the wrong queen, that's when the real fallout would hit. By the time Karen's SUV was half buried in the muck of my pond, word had spread faster than a grass fire in August. Out here in the country, you don't need social media to get news moving. A rooster crows, a dog barks, and before you know it, everyone's leaning on fence posts with their arms crossed, waiting to see what happens next. At first, it was just Karen, red-faced and shrieking, mascara streaked down her cheeks like war paint, yelling into her phone for tow trucks, lawyers, and divine intervention. But within the hour, my property line looked like the front row of a rodeo. Farmers from down the road showed up, kids on dirt bikes circled like buzzards, and even a couple of old-timers from town brought lawn chairs and a thermos of coffee. Entertainment in the country doesn't come from Netflix. It comes from scenes like this. Now you might be asking, what about the law? Didn't Karen call the cops? Oh, she did. About 5 times. Every time her SUV slipped another inch, she made another call. By the third one, she was threatening to declare it an emergency situation. And sure enough, about 20 minutes later, 2 sheriff's cruisers rolled up my dirt road, lights flashing, sirens silent. The crowd parted like the Red Sea, leaving a clear view of the scene. Karen's luxury SUV nose-deep in pond water, her HOA entourage covered in mud, and me sitting calmly on my excavator, sipping coffee like it was just another Tuesday. Before I tell you how that went down, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. Because what happens when the law gets involved? That's where the story goes from funny to unforgettable. The deputies stepped out of their cruisers with that practiced calm you only see in small-town law enforcement, the kind of men who've seen barn fires, family disputes, and the occasional cow blocking the highway. But even they weren't prepared for Karen. She charged at them like a wild turkey, flapping her arms and screaming, "Arrest him! He sabotaged my car. He endangered my life. He's destroying our community." Her voice cracked like a cheap radio. She pointed at me with such force I thought her arm might snap. The deputy held up a hand. "Ma'am, slow down. Whose property is this?" Karen blinked. "What?" "Well, technically his, but it's part of our community atmosphere. It's a shared environment." The deputy's expression didn't budge. "Ma'am, is this your land?" Karen's jaw twitched. "No, but—" He cut her off. "Sir, this your farm?" "Yes, sir," I said, handing over a laminated copy of my deed I always keep in my truck. "Been in my family 3 generations." The deputy nodded, glanced at it, and handed it back. Then he turned to Karen. "Ma'am, you parked your vehicle on private property without permission. That's trespassing." The second deputy smirked. "And trespassing with style, too." The crowd laughed. Farmers slapped their knees. One of the teenagers shouted, "She's guilty of illegal parking." The laughter rolled across the pasture like thunder. Karen's face turned crimson. She shrieked, "It's not trespassing. It's rural access land." The deputies exchanged a look. Then one of them outright chuckled. "Ma'am, that's not a thing." But Karen wasn't done. She stomped her mud-soaked sneakers into the ground, waving her arms like she was leading a parade. "He dug up the soil. He loosened it on purpose. This is sabotage. Terrorism against the HOA. Now I'll admit, that one almost made me spit out my coffee. Terrorism? For letting gravity do its job." I leaned forward from the excavator and called out calm as ever, "Sheriff, I warned her 3 times not to park there." She refused. Nature did the rest. The deputy scratched his chin, clearly amused. "Well, ma'am, I don't see a crime here. What I see is trespassing. And if the landowner wants to press charges, he can." The crowd roared again. Some clapped. Others whistled. Even the cows at the fence let out a few low moos, almost like they were in on the joke. Karen's eyes widened, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. She spun toward her HOA crew, desperate for backup. But they weren't much help. Half of them were wiping mud off their clothes, muttering about insurance coverage. The other half were trying to edge away from her, like rats abandoning a sinking ship. Still, she wasn't finished. Karen whipped out her phone and dialed her insurance company right there on speaker. She launched into a dramatic performance, claiming I lured her SUV into a swamp like some kind of hillbilly supervillain. The agent listened, patient and professional. Then they asked one simple question. "Mrs. Thompson, was the vehicle parked legally on authorized property?" Karen stammered. "Well, technically no, but—" "Then I'm sorry," the agent said. "This claim is denied." You could have heard a pin drop, if not for the explosion of laughter from the crowd. The look on Karen's face was priceless, like someone had just told her Starbucks stopped selling pumpkin spice lattes forever. But even then, she clung to her last weapon, lawsuits. She jabbed a muddy finger at me and bellowed, "We'll sue! We'll drag you through court until you beg for mercy." That was my cue. I walked calmly into my house, came back with a thick folder, and spread out documents on the hood of the sheriff's cruiser. Official land surveys, conservation easement papers, a notarized statement of boundaries my father had filed decades ago. "See this?" I said. "My land. See this stamp? Agricultural preserve. See this clause? Any unauthorized development or interference triggers fines up to $50,000 per violation, payable by the encroaching party." The deputies let out a low whistle. The HOA folks paled. "And Karen, She nearly collapsed. That's when it hit her. Not only had she lost her SUV, not only had she been humiliated in front of half the county, but she'd just dragged her entire HOA into a pit of fines deeper than the pond itself. The crowd erupted in cheers. Dirt bikes revved. Farmers slapped me on the back. Someone shouted, "That's how you handle an HOA." Karen stood frozen, dripping mud, trembling, her once proud SUV bubbling quietly in the pond like a tombstone to arrogance. And I knew then, the war was over. But the legend? The legend was just beginning. The morning after Karen's SUV sank into my pond, the farm was quiet. Too quiet. No SUVs lined up at my fence, no clipboard scribbling notes, no megaphone booming accusations of unsightly nuisances, just cows chewing cud, chickens scratching at the dirt, and ducks splashing like nothing out of the ordinary had happened. But of course something had happened. Something big, and as much as Karen wished she could bury it in the mud with her SUV, the story was only beginning to spread. Now, before I take you into how this little feud exploded beyond the county line, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe, because this is the chapter where one HOA queen's arrogance goes from local embarrassment to viral infamy. At first, it started with whispers, neighbors stopping by the fence asking if it was true. "A car in the pond?" Karen screaming? The excavator nudging it along. I didn't even need to answer. The evidence was still sticking out of the water, the back bumper and one tail light glinting like a warning sign. By noon, a couple of curious folks wandered up with cameras. One was a kid from the next farm over, maybe 17 years old, with a dirt bike and a knack for editing videos. He uploaded the whole scene, Karen shrieking, the excavator idling, the SUV sliding nose first into the pond with the title, "HOA Karen Gets Sunk." Literally. By sunset, that video had over 50,000 views. By morning, it was climbing into the hundreds of thousands. Memes were everywhere. Screenshots of Karen covered in mud, photoshopped onto the Titanic. Captions like "Community standards meet farm standards." My pond was trending. My excavator had its own fan base. Meanwhile, Meadowbrook Estate scrambled to save face. The HOA board held an emergency meeting, issuing a statement about unfortunate misunderstandings and isolated incidents. But no matter how they spun it, the damage was done. The internet doesn't forget, and the crowd that had gathered by my pond the day it all went down made sure the truth was documented from every angle. Karen, of course, vanished for a few days. Rumor had it she was holed up inside her house, curtains drawn, while landscapers tried to clean the mud out of her driveway. But hiding doesn't erase humiliation, and hers had gone global. Insurance wouldn't touch her claim. The HOA started whispering about dues hikes to cover potential fines. Neighbors muttered about leadership changes. Even her closest allies, the clipboard warriors who once marched at her side, started to distance themselves, their loyalty sinking as fast as her SUV. And then came the kicker, the fines. See, my father had been smart decades ago. He'd placed much of our land, including the pond, under a conservation trust. That meant any unauthorized use, interference, or development wasn't just trespassing. It was a violation of federal protection laws, and those came with teeth. $50,000 per violation. Every yoga mat, every wine glass, every brunch table and tent stake Karen had driven into my pasture added up. When the letter from the conservation office arrived, I nearly spit my coffee laughing. Karen hadn't just embarrassed herself. She'd dragged her entire HOA into the kind of financial hole you don't crawl out of with bake sales and block parties. The Meadowbrook board panicked. Meetings grew heated. Dues skyrocketed. Neighbors began pointing fingers. And at the center of it all, Karen was suddenly very quiet, but the internet wasn't. The video of her screaming, sinking, and slipping into the mud was being clipped, shared, and remixed faster than she could file complaints. One version had circus music playing in the background. Another slowed down her fall into the pond, adding dramatic Titanic flute music. I didn't make the memes. I didn't encourage them, but I'll admit, I laughed, loudly. And while Karen tried to salvage her reputation, a new opportunity landed on my porch. A production company reached out, offering to license the footage for a reality TV pilot called Farm vs. HOA. They wanted me to appear in the trailer. Me, just a farmer who never asked for any of this, suddenly being called the HOA slayer by strangers online. It was surreal. One week I was patching fences and baling hay. The next, my pond was trending on Twitter, and neighbors were driving by just to take selfies with the Karen Carr Memorial. Some even joked about putting up a plaque. Here lies Meadowbrook's pride, Sank 2025. But as my farm turned into a local landmark, Karen's life unraveled. She tried to sue, of course, threatened to drag me into court for emotional distress and property sabotage, but not a single lawyer wanted the case. Between the viral video, the conservation laws, and the sheriff's report clearing me of wrongdoing, she had nothing. Her threats fizzled into silence, and when the HOA board finally held a vote of no confidence, Karen was out. Stripped of her lifestyle chairwoman title, abandoned by the very people she once bossed around, she left Meadowbrook in disgrace. Some said she moved in with her sister in another state. Others claimed she was still trying to scheme her way into another HOA throne somewhere else. But here in this county, her reign was finished. And me, my farm went back to normal, mostly. The cows still mooed at dawn, the chickens still scratched at the dirt, and the ducks still patrolled the pond. Except now, every so often, someone would stop by the fence, point at the water, and laugh. Because even though the SUV was eventually dragged out, the legend of what happened there was stuck forever. I didn't sink that car out of malice. I sank it because boundaries matter. Because when arrogance pushes past patience, you've got to remind the world where the line is drawn. And sometimes, that reminder comes in the form of a $70,000 SUV sinking nose first into a muddy farm pond. In the days and weeks after Karen's SUV sank into my pond, life on the farm slipped back into its steady rhythm. The cows still lined up impatiently at the fence at feeding time, the roosters still crowed at dawn, and the sun still painted the hayfields gold every evening. But there was something different in the air, something permanent, because the pond wasn't just a pond anymore. It was a story, a symbol, a legend whispered at diners, shared in feed stores, and replayed endlessly on phones across the county, and far beyond. Now I know what you're thinking. Surely that was the end of it. Surely Karen learned her lesson, and yes, in one sense it was over. But in another, the fallout rippled wider than I ever could have imagined. Before I tell you how it all wrapped up, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. Because what you're about to hear isn't just the end of one HOA feud. It's the kind of lesson that sticks with you long after the mud dries. The video never slowed down. By the second week, it had passed 1 million views. Local news picked it up, then regional outlets, then national blogs hungry for a good Karen story. Headlines called it The Farmer, as the HOA Queen and When Property. Lines fight back. Some even dubbed me the Pond Enforcer. Tourists started showing up. Not in droves, but enough that I'd see cars pull over by the road, families hopping out to snap a photo with the pond in the background. Some waved at me, grinning like they'd spotted a celebrity. Others left notes in my mailbox, thanking me for standing up for the little guy. One even sent a case of beer with a note that read, "For services rendered to property owners everywhere." I didn't mind. Out here, you take kindness where you find it. But for Meadowbrook Estates, things weren't so rosy. The HOA was drowning in fines. Those conservation easement violations stacked up like bricks, and no amount of bake sales or special assessments could dig them out of the hole Karen had left them in. Homeowners started bickering at meetings, pointing fingers, demanding answers. Some blamed Karen for dragging them into the mess. Others blamed the board for not stopping her sooner. Either way, the unity of their perfect gated lifestyle was cracked wide open. Karen herself had become a ghost. After being voted out as lifestyle chairwoman, she disappeared from public view. Rumor said she sold her Meadowbrook house in a quiet fire sale, packed up what pride she had left, and fled to live with family in another state. Nobody ever confirmed it, but the silence spoke volumes. Her once loyal followers tried to pretend they'd never supported her. The same clipboard warriors who once paraded around my fence line suddenly claimed they always thought she was going too far. I didn't bother correcting them. Let them rewrite their own history. The land had already written the truth in mud and water. As for the SUV, eventually a salvage crew came out with heavy equipment, winches, and a bill so steep it made even the HOA treasurer pale. By the time they dragged it out, it was half rotted, caked in muck, and stripped for parts. Last I heard, the bumper ended up hanging on a bar wall in town as a conversation piece, a kind of trophy, a reminder. And that's when it hit me. This whole ordeal had never really been about a vehicle, or even about Karen. It was about boundaries, those invisible lines that separate peace from chaos, respect from arrogance, and freedom from control. My land wasn't just dirt and fences, it was a legacy. My father and his father before him had bled for it, worked it, and passed it down. And when someone disrespected that, they weren't just stepping on soil, they were stepping on everything my family built. Karen came here with HOA bylaws and entitlement, believing she could bend the land to her will. She thought she could turn my farm into her playground. But land doesn't bend to arrogance. Land remembers. It pushes back. And when she ignored every warning, when she planted herself in the middle of my world, it wasn't me who punished her. It was the ground beneath her tires. That's the real lesson here. In life, people will always test your limits. Some will nudge. Others will shove. And if you don't stand firm, they'll take more and more until there's nothing left. But the moment you hold your ground, firmly, calmly, without apology, you send a message. Not just to them, but to yourself. That your space matters. That your voice matters. That your peace is worth protecting. I didn't sink Karen's SUV out of spite. I didn't do it to humiliate her. I did it because enough was enough. Because patience has limits, and respect has to be earned, not demanded. And when that SUV slipped nose first into the pond, it wasn't just a car sinking. It was arrogance. It was entitlement. It was the illusion that HOA bylaws outrank common sense. By the end of it all, Karen was gone. The HOA was humbled. My land was mine again. And the pond. Well, the pond still sits there, calm and quiet, rippling under the wind. But every time I look at it, I can't help but smile. Because to me, it's more than water and mud. It's a story. A reminder. A promise. So wherever you are listening to this tale, remember this: protect your peace, respect your own boundaries, and never ever let anyone, HOA or otherwise, convince you that your worth depends on their standards. And if they try, well, just make sure they don't park too close to the pond.